Network and the Journal of eScience Librarianship. Before we dive into today's menu, a couple of housekeeping items. As you should have just been prompted, this session is being recorded. You will receive the recording in a few weeks, and we will, of course, share it out via the usual channels. I don't think this is a problem because it's a webinar, but please do remain muted unless speaking. If you are like me and you are at home and you have pets or families around you, please know they are welcome attendees. Do not apologize for them. Please go ahead and use the Q&A feature or the chat to ask questions or provide resources. And throughout all of this, I don't remember how to do it. There it is. I encourage you all to review the Data Curation Network Code of Conduct, because that's what I hope we can all abide by today. So I'm Michaela. I am stepping in for Cynthia Hudson-Vital as today's MC, and I'm really excited to present our awesome speakers. So first up, we will have Seth Erickson from Penn State Libraries talking about plain text and character encoding, followed by Casey, is it Soka? I was going to ask him when he got here, talking about hyperactive data curation, a video case study from behavioral science, I apologize, and responding to reality, evolving curation practices and infrastructure at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, presented by Hua Luong. I'm going to start with a quick background on the Data Curation Network, just in case you might not be familiar. I promise I won't spend too much time here so we can dive into the meat of the conversation. But the Data Curation Network is a partnership of 15 institutions. You can see our logos there that share curatorial staff and expertise to build a trusted community-led network of curators. Our network helps to advance open research by making data more ethical, reusable, and understandable. And we're a very active community of data stewards and curation practitioners who also share our knowledge and time to collaboratively curate data. So we have been active since 2016, thanks to funding from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and we transitioned to a member-funded organization in July 2021. Here are some of the things that the DCN provides and facilitates, but the one thing I like to really talk about, kind of one of our main selling points, is our collective curation model. So we have 15 partner institutions that contribute nearly 50 individual curation experts who are the foundation of our shared curation. So this is what it looks like at curation at scale. Institutional data repositories like those represented on the left are seeing increasing deposits from a wide variety of disciplines in various formats. And through the DCN, institutional members can ask for a DCN expert to curate different data sets for them, or they can work within the member institutions to learn how to curate those different formats or disciplines for future reference. So in other words, the DCN community is really wonderful for addressing both immediate issues as well as for teaching and empowering local curators. So we'll help you solve your short-term problem while also growing your long-term goals of having a really robust curator network. This is what that shared curation workflow looks like in practice. On the left-hand side, we have the DCN partner institution who receives data from a researcher. The local curation team triages the data set to decide whether they would like to curate it locally or if they would like additional support from a DCN expert. When it is sent to the Data Curation Network, the coordinator, that's me, matches the data set with the pool of available curators using discipline, format, and capacity considerations to make the best match possible. The DCN curator then applies the curated model, which I'll show you in a second, and provides feedback and recommendations to the local institution, who then closes the loop on their ends. And that's one thing I really wanted to highlight, is that the DCN doesn't directly intervene to talk to researchers at the institutions. We really enforce that data librarian and data creator relationship. And you may be familiar with this. It's our curated workflow. It's primarily a teaching tool, but it's a really helpful representation for students, researchers, or even data curators to understand the various steps that go into the curation process. We just released version 2 of this that includes some key ethical considerations to ask at each step. So if you haven't seen it in a while, I'd encourage you to check it out. And as I said, you'll have access to all of these slides in a couple of weeks. The last thing I like to always highlight are our data curation primers. These are concise and iterative resources for curators that walk users through curation in practice for different data formats or disciplines. The first batch of these was created thanks to generous funding from the IMLS Foundation and staffed by members of the Data Curation Network Education subgroup. And with that, I'm going to turn it over and introduce our next speaker, Seth Erickson, who's going to talk to us today about plain text and character encoding. Take it away, Seth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seth Erickson, a research data librarian at Penn State, and I'm going to share some recommendations from a primer that I wrote on character encoding and plain text. I think plain text is one of these things that I find sort of endlessly fascinating because it has a kind of a strange mix of being both simple and very complicated at the same time. So I'm hoping to kind of give it its due attention here. So I'll give a little bit of background on what plain text data is and why it's important. I'll discuss some approaches to identifying text encoding formats and then ways to address broken text data and some recommendations. So first off, what is plain text? Plain text is the rudimentary representation of text by a computer. It's rudimentary in the sense that text is modeled as a linear sequence of symbols, so you won't find hierarchical elements like pages and chapters defined in plain text standards. More formally, the Unicode standard, which is the modern text encoding standard, defines plain text as computer encoded text that consists only of a sequence of code points from a given standard with no other formatting or structural information. So plain text is important because it's everywhere. It's a foundational abstraction that makes that many high-level formats and protocols are based on. So HTML, HTTP, XML, JSON, CSV, these are standards and protocols. They're all based on plain text. And plain text is also kind of receives accolades for being a kind of a universal interface that allows different kinds of devices and machines to interoperate. So one of my points in the primer is that plain text isn't so plain. Modern text encoding is actually very, very complicated, and it's important for people who work with text data to understand some of these complexities. So next slide, please. So underneath all of the key standard here, or set of standards, are the Unicode standards. The recommended format for modern plain text data is based on Unicode. So at the center of the Unicode standard is this universal character set. This is a set of characters or code points that can be used in text data. Importantly, this character set can grow. So the most recent version of Unicode, which is version 14, defines over 114,000 different code points. And these include 37 new emojis, and most importantly, I guess, like playground slide and pregnant man. So to actually use these new characters, you need to wait for the companies that design new fonts and update operating systems before you can actually use those characters in your text. So Unicode characters just define the concepts of the characters, not the graphical representation. So next slide, please. So a little bit more about code points, or these different abstractions involved here. So this slide is illustrating the distinction between different levels of abstraction used in plain text. The code points that make up the Unicode standard are numerical values that correspond to an abstract character name. And that abstract character name is something like capital letter A or face with tears of joy. It's not a graphical thing, it's just a concept. So the representation of code points as bytes is actually handled by a different standard, an encoding format, that translates those abstractions, those abstract code points, into sequences of bytes. And there are two primary encoding formats that we're concerned with: UTF-8 and UTF-16. Generally speaking, UTF-8 is recommended, but the primer goes into some discussion about circumstances in which you might want to use UTF-16, but both are fine. Next slide, please. So now let's talk a little bit about sort of text encoding problems that can arise. text encoding problems occur when you decode text using a different standard than the one used to encode it. So while the adoption of Unicode has made these kinds of problems less frequent, they still happen. I know from experience that oftentimes when I'm working with CSV files that are authored in Excel, I oftentimes have to convert them from Windows 1252 to UTF-8. So the first step in resolving these kinds of problems is to identify the format used to encode them. This can be challenging because that information is not always available as metadata. But one strategy is to open the data in a text editor, which will allow you to kind of switch quickly between different kinds of formats and then see which one kind of looks best. That's being illustrated here with Visual Studio Code. And importantly, when you read a text file using these different kinds of formats, you're not changing the underlying data, you're just representing it in different ways. Next slide, please. So here's another illustration of how to fix broken text, this time using the terminal or the command line. One of the ways that text problems manifest is through the appearance of the replacement characters. So this is a Unicode code point that is used when the decoding software encounters an invalid sequence of bytes. So it's a question mark oftentimes, or a diamond, a little diamond with a question mark inside of it. So the image on the right illustrates a way to address broken text using the command line. First, we're seeing that there's a text data file with some invalid byte sequence, the question mark. When we print it out, we see the question mark. We can use the command -v to decode it using UTF-8, and we encounter this error message saying that there's an incomplete character shift sequence. We can use the file command to try to guess what the original encoding format was. And in this case, we see that file tells us it was ISO 8859. And then you can use -v, which is another command to convert between, which is a command that's used to convert between different standards, to convert from ISO 8859 to UTF-8. So that's an example of correcting broken text. Next slide, please. Another way that text errors can manifest, aside from invalid byte sequences, is when they just generate the wrong character data. So plain text can be technically valid in two different encoding formats, but yield different characters depending on which format is used to decode it. So again, the problem is to identify the format that was used to encode it and then convert to UTF-8. There are also tools, in this case, FTFY, that do a kind of heuristic analysis of your text and will try to identify and clean up the text. And that's what's being illustrated in this slide. Importantly, this kind of manipulation is going to change the underlying data, right? Or it might. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. So the recommendations from the primer are first and foremost that text data should generally be encoded using a Unicode format, typically UTF-8. The sort of middle three bullets here are about identifying the metadata and confirming that the correct format is used in the case of XML or JSON or CSV. And then lastly, if you do need to transform the data, if you must transform or convert previously deposited data to resolve text encoding problems, it's important to keep the original version and to indicate any transformations that you as a curator have taken. And that's all for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth. I realized at the beginning I should have called more attention to your amazing mug that says I square Unicode. That was very funny, and we should have appreciated that more. If you have any questions for Seth, please write them down or put them in the chat or Q&A, and we will circle back to them. But for now, I would like to kick it over to Casey Soska, who I believe is here. To present to us on hyperactive data curation, a video case study from behavioral science. Take it away, Casey.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to share a little bit about a manuscript that we had in the special issue on of eScience Librarianship on data curation. The co-authors on this paper are the PIs on, and I'm the lead of the science team behind the Play and Learning Across a Year project, which is a big data, multi-institution, video-based behavioral science initiative. I'm going to talk first just about some of the current data sharing practices in the behavioral sciences and some of our recommendations on best practices in curation and sharing workflows and timelines, and a little bit about the Play project where we have implemented this active curation as a case study. Next slide, please. So right now in the behavioral sciences, there's really over the past 6 to 7 years or so, there's been a growing acceptance of and actual practicing of doing data sharing. Despite this, from the surveys that we've done, we found that people still very much see data sharing as both costly and time consuming. And typically, when they are doing data sharing and doing data curation, it's happening post hoc. So, well after the data had been collected during the time of publishing. And because of this, data sharing and curation is really treated as this horrific, onerous last step in getting their data published and not as a service to the field in any way. Next slide, please. Um, But as you might imagine, there are a lot of pitfalls that I've both experienced personally and have seen happen by doing data curation post hoc. In many cases, curation after the fact leads to this kind of upload and dump mentality, where you just stick up everything that you have and put it in a repo, pat yourself on the back, and call it a day. And this leads to data that are incredibly hard to reuse, protocols that are hard to replicate, and in many cases, the data are largely useless due to poor, inconsistent labeling or absence of relevant metadata. Additionally, there's often a very long lag, especially in the behavioral sciences, where human participants are involved between when the data were actually collected, when they were annotated, analyzed, written up, and accepted for publication. And so the provenance of why certain measures were collected and how they were treated is lost. Details of even the protocol that is now reduced to a sentence or two in a method are lost. And if you didn't have plans for sharing, there is a big challenge in actually recontacting human participants in order to get their sharing permissions. Um, Moreover, whenever the sharing is done as it's related to a publication, oftentimes it's mainly just flat files, analysis scripts, processing steps, but not actual raw research videos. And for behavioral science, video serves as the primary source of data. This might be recordings of a participant performing a task or a naturalistic observation. Traditionally, these videos are just stored on a lab server and they are never seen or shared again. Next slide, please. But video are incredibly valuable. Videos are infinitely reusable as research data. So even if a researcher was collecting mother-child interaction data, for instance, and they're interested in emotional expression, another person could go back and perform annotations on those exact same videos if they're interested in manual interaction or locomotor behavior or the words that mothers and children are saying. So the data sets that are based on raw video are incredibly reusable. Videos are perfect for documenting protocols much more than a paragraph in a methods section because you can see what the experimenter is doing, what the researcher is doing, what the participants are doing, and exactly how to replicate that. Videos are amazing teaching tools because you can demonstrate how a behavior occurs in context, how that might differ between participants of different disability status or different ages for children. But sharing identifiable videos where faces and voices are completely transparent and on video requires infrastructure for being able to store and share those. Next slide, please. And that is where Databrary comes in. Databrary is a video data library that is geared toward behavioral scientists. As of this morning, there were over 1,500 investigators at 700 institutions sharing close to 100,000 hours of raw research video from contributors all across the world. Next slide, please. And Databrary allows the sharing of these raw videos with faces and voices fully visible and hearable because of a two-part policy framework. First, institutions agree to oversee and vouch for the status of investigators at their institution. And in turn, investigators are responsible for oversight of their affiliates and themselves. So affiliates might be students and staff who would be contributing data or downloading data, and overseeing their activities to both upload and download data. And the same agreement that is signed covers every activity they might do on Databrary, from contributing, reusing, browsing, or excerpting videos. We don't require a specific authorization to access a shared repository or a specific activity. Once there is an authorization agreement in place and an authorized investigators on Databrary, they can do everything. In turn, participants are choosing the level of sharing for their raw videos from the research session. So after a research session, we would ask what level they feel comfortable with, whether that is only with authorized investigators on Databrary, allowing excerpts to be shown to the public, or whether their videos can be made fully public. Databrary has a standardized spreadsheet format for storing metadata about each session, and each session can contain multiple video or any number of different video or non-video files that might be associated with a particular point of data collection. And then all of these sessions together combine to make a volume where data from a particular project or set of projects might be shared, and Databrary mints a DOI for each one of these volumes. Next slide, please. And then because there is a DOI, during the publication process, researchers can then share links directly to this volume and the publication with the DOI and a URL, and they can even link to specific video assets. For instance, in here, this is a method section with the link out directly to a video of what that method looks like to demonstrate a protocol, a particular behavior, or a task by having a direct link between the publication and a particular asset on their Databrary volume. Next slide, please. So, doing all of this requires a lot of curation, getting data into a format where you could feel comfortable sharing it out, and knowing exactly what are in your video files requires a workflow. And so this is a practice that we've kind of adopted for curating and sharing video data and protocols that we term hyperactive curation, which builds on the recommendations of doing active curation, where it goes beyond just sharing the raw research materials all at sort of each step, but sharing every step of the research process all the way through. Next slide, please. So I just want us to focus on this kind of left-hand column here. This is a figure from in the paper, and there are all of the details about all of the different materials that we curate, how we curate them, what is automatic and what is manual on the right side. So if you want more details on all of that, it's in the manuscript, but I just kind of want to cover some of the main points of the basic timeline of the workflow that we've been using as part of the Play project and recommend to others. Next slide. So for hyperactive curation, we recommend starting by sharing the protocol once it's established. And for behavioral scientists, that means with video, showing what it actually looks like in a video of here's someone performing this particular protocol. And then at that same time, start planning what curation should look like. What repository do you want to share in? How do we want to be sharing? What do we want to share and when? All of that before data collection begins, which to many behavioral scientists is completely brand new to be thinking about curating and sharing before you have even stepped out into the field. Then, as you are collecting the data, we recommend curating and sharing the raw data whenever possible. So anytime a new session comes in, curating it and checking on the formatting, and then immediately putting it up into a repository. If there is some sort of processing or analyses that need to be done on any data files, questionnaires, physiological measures or things, curating those and then sharing those as soon as the processing is done and finalized. Next slide. And then In behavioral science, there's also a lot of data annotation or augmentation that's done through coding, either machine learning coding or coding done by a manual observer. And that involves watching back through these videos. And those same annotations and augmentations can be curated in a standardized way. And the annotation manuals with video excerpts of exactly what counts as a particular behavior, what doesn't count as a particular behavior, can all be shared whenever those are ready. And finally, now all of these pieces have already been shared along the way. The protocol, the raw data, the process data, annotations have already been curated. They're up on a repository. They might already be shared publicly, or this is the point where you can, on Databrary, it's as easy as pressing a button to take a volume from being private to shared. And you can turn that on with the publication instead of having to go through this whole step once you have actually had the publication accepted. It can be done when you're ready to submit. Next slide, please. We are putting to practice these data curation workflows in the Play and Learning Across a Year project, or PLAY. Next slide, please. And the goal of PLAY is to build a corpus of 1,000 hours of mother-child natural interaction in the home. The data are being collected by over 30 institutions across the US. And accompanying all of these videos are standardized transcripts and annotations of standard behaviors, as well as parent report questionnaires. And this protocol was designed by over 60 researchers. So this is very different than what happens in many behavioral science studies, where it's an individual researcher or two designing a protocol and implementing it. We got buy-in from many different researchers across behavioral science and developmental science, and everything is openly shared. Right now, all of the protocol is completely shared, all out. And we actually make the people that are collecting the data, the students and staff that are going out on these home visits, are data curators. They're actively curating the data during collection. So we've built an application using the open source software Cobalt Toolbox on a tablet that we give to them, and they use this for collecting demographics and questionnaire data. But secretly, behind the scenes, we're also automatically generating metadata and file labels for them, so they know exactly what to name the session, what should go in all of the metadata fields into Databrary, exactly how everything should be formatted in those cases. We give them instructions in this app on how to create a session folder on Databrary during enrollment, how to upload the videos to Databrary after collection, and mark which particular task a video is associated with. Next slide, please. And then we have a central team at NYU where the main grant is housed, and the central Play team performs quality assurance on all of the videos, on all of the metadata, the transcripts and annotations as we get them back. There's a manual process where video are watched back to ensure that there was fidelity to the protocol. And there's automated tools that we've built for checking file labeling and is all of the metadata present and in the right format. And what we've found is that this quality assurance serves many, many purposes. It allows us to ensure that we have trained researchers in the field to collect data to the protocol, ensure that all of the steps in curation are done properly. And we need to be managing these video files and annotations anyway. And so we're doing it in a consistent and repeatable and transparent way. So this also serves as our file management process. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to end by just sharing some of the lessons that we've learned by Play in doing this. So we found it's incredibly valuable, and there's absolutely no reason why behavioral science researchers should not be sharing protocols and resources and data as they go, as soon as they're available, putting them up on a repository, and especially video data are available to demonstrate what are being done. We found that curation duties can be standardized and distributed, even so a need for funding for oversight, which is something that we were both woefully underfunded and did not really put in specific funding for, and we encourage others to make sure you are funding curation. And to be able to use your networks of library and data scientists, we found has been incredibly helpful for identifying tools. And my last slide here are just all the resources that we have in case anyone's interested, including our project website, our GitHub repository for all of the tools and applications we've developed, Databrary, which is the repository we're storing all of the data on, as well as our open source annotation software. DataView is available there as well.
Casey, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And I don't know about anybody else, but I know I was nodding pretty along with you at your lessons learned, especially like fund your curators and data librarians, and standardized curation, even though it might have some nuance, it's always helpful. I'm now going to turn it over to our final speaker, Hua Luong of University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, to present Responding to Reality, Evolving Curation Practices and Infrastructure at UIUC. Hua?
Yep, thank you so much, Mikala. So hi everyone, my name is Hua Luong and I am Associate Director for the Research Data Service at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I'm really happy to be here on the behalf of my co-authors to share with you about the paper that we wrote last year. Next slide, please. So I structured this presentation in the same way as the paper that consisting of 3 sections. The first section is just a brief literature review and the reason why we wrote this paper. The second is about the Illinois Data Bank and some statistics. This section has 2 subsections. The first one is talking about our local curation workflow and some challenges that we are facing. The next subsection is about a new feature that we implemented. It was new at the time we wrote the paper to have balanced the researchers' needs and curation benefits. And last, we talk about technical challenges, though including the cloud infrastructure, large file transfer, and curation of archive file types. Next slide, please. So the first one is introduction. So this section can be easily presented as a timeline. So in 2011, the National Science Board report stated the importance of data documentation and data sharing. Also in this report, the NSF now is requirement to have a data management plans included for each grant proposal submission. In 2013, a memo from the OSTP indicated the effort of increased public access to research data generated from federally funded projects. So with those pressure led to the changes at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So in 2014, the Research Data Service was established with the hire of the director, 2 former curators at the time, and 1 programmer. In 2016, the Illinois Data Bank, known as our institutional repository, was launched. In the same year, the RDS team wrote a paper with the title Overly Honest Data Repository Development. So this paper provides a holistic view of the development process for the Illinois Data Bank. And 2021 marked 5 years old of the Illinois Data Bank, and we decided to write this paper to reflect on our data curation practices, describe the process of adding a new features to address the frequency of versioning datasets, and discuss technical improvements and challenges that we face as we continue to meet the needs of our researchers. Next slide, please. So this one is about the Illinois Data Bank background. So the RDS operate and manage the Illinois Data Bank. We are funded by the Office of Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation and housed at the University Library to leverage the established digital preservation and repository services expertise that we have. So only graduate students, staff and faculty can deposit the data sets. And once the data set is published on the website, it will become available to everyone around the world. The Illinois Data Bank is built in-house on top of our Medusa system. So Medusa is the preservation system that used to preserve all the digital material for the library. And the data and the data curators the data and the data creators must meet on the requirements to deposit the data. So the data must be in the final stage. Since the Illinois Data Bank is a public access repository, because we do not expect any sensitive data to be deposited here. And actually, before filling out the submission form, the depositors must consent that all the sensitive or like confidential information has been removed. And at least 1 data creator must be affiliated with the university. And the data creator must have a permission to publicly distribute the data. Next slide, please. So this slide showing up some statistics for the Illinois Data Bank as of December of 2020, which is the number that included in the paper. So as you can see, at that time, we have 300 public data set coming from 53 units across campus and are categorized in like 5 different subject areas. We also have 140 drafts data set at the time with more than with almost 200,000 downloads times, and 58% of our depositor are new depositor, which means those publishing their first data set with us, and 42% of the depositor are returning depositors, as those who have published at least one data set before. Which slide, please? So this slide is the first subsection. In this section, talking about our local data curation workflow. And this comic was run by our director and then digitized by our former graduate assistant, who is currently data librarian at Western Michigan University. So this comic captures really well our local curation workflow. So as you can see, there are 2 pathways that the researchers can choose when submitting their data set. So they can either choose to have the data set published, then reviews, or we do a pre-ingest curation, which means we will review it and then they will publish the data set. And that one is the feature that we implemented in 2018, and we will talk more about it in the next slide. But either way, the curators will receive a notification to start a curation process, and different curator will have a different way to curate the data set. Even though I am the main person doing the curation, but we cross-train so then we can back each other up when needed. So that is why you see curator A and B in the comics. So in general, we will check for the metadata to ensure that the minimal requirements are met, that including the dataset title, the license, and the corresponding author. And then we will review the documentation or the dataset description, try to understand the data. The depth and length of the curation process heavily depends on the size and the complexity of the dataset and how well it is documented. So for some data set, for example, from the crop sciences department, require us like 6 to 8 hours to curate due to the number of the files in different data formats and high level documentation describing individual files. On the other side of the spectrum, we also have some data set that contain only like 1 or 2 file would take like less than an hour to curate, but on average, we spend around 2 hours to review each data set in the Illinois Data Bank. We try to review as many files in the data set as possible. So for the data sets that contains like large number of similar files or like multiple large files, saying that more than 20 gigabytes, we will check a subset of the file rather than checking every single file. So the next step is to take note of missing information and suggestions, and collaboration is a key here. So we are so lucky that we are housed at the university library with a great network of subject specialists, and we are also a member of the data curation network. So the curator will decide whether the data set could benefit from having a review from a liaisons of the depositors department and then reach out to them, or when the data set come in the format that we don't have a local expert to review, we will send the data set to the data curation network. So those formats, for example, as NetCDF, CZI. And then when we providing feedback to researchers, we try to provide actionable suggestions without overwhelming them by limiting our recommendation to 3 most important actions. And I do want to emphasize that all our suggestions are optional, and the depositor are free to accept or reject those suggestions. So next slide, please. So this subsection is in the paper is over a page long, but what we really want to showcase here is this screenshot. This feature is called the pre-publication review. So the Illinois Data Bank is a self-deposit platform. So this means the depositor is free to upload their files and publish their dataset at their convenience without waiting for any approval. So this process allows the depositor to obtain their TOI in a timely manner. However, per our policy, any changes to file within a published dataset will require a creation of a new version of the dataset, which is sometimes less than ideal. So in 2 years of operation, we observed some confusions among the depositors about versioning. And right now the process of versioning is like manually, so it's time consuming for both depositor and curators. So in 2018, the unit decided to create a feature that allow and encourage depositors who are not in a time crunch to request a review prior to the dataset publication. So this feature is called pre-publication review, and it took us almost a month to refine the language, and it was implemented in June 2008. Next slide, please. So the last section in the paper is about technical challenges with cloud infrastructure. So when the Illinois Data Bank launched, on storage and web service resources were hosted and administered on campus, we run into unexpected downtime. We know that as we grow in, since more researchers utilize the Illinois Data Bank, we need some storage design that to be more highly available and to scale better with the need of our researchers. So on February 2019, we switched on from on-campus platform to Amazon Web Services, AWS, for large file transfer. So in our experience, the researchers with large data files, say in greater than 50 gigabytes, particularly value our fee to them institutional support to share the data. But support for that scale count for technicals beyond basic web forms. So in fact, we offer 2 terabytes per faculty per year. So soon after the Illinois Data Bank's launch, the data file ingest API and sample Python client were developed to support large file ingestion. However, our researchers started encountering frustration in uploading the files larger than 100 gigabytes. And actually before COVID, our programmer even came to the researchers lab with an external hard drive, make a copy of the data, and then come back to her computer, then upload those files to the data bank. So this was so time consuming and inefficiency for us. So we look into and implemented Clobus, a transfer service that's familiar to many researchers who are normally working with large files. So on those, the Clobus transfer process that we have right now is not 100% automatic, but it's improved the experience of our end users and also minimize some of the challenges that curator and also programmers have to face while trying to work with large data set. The last one was in this section is about archive file types. So we have a lot of zip, tart, 7-zip files in the Illinois Data Bank. So our programmers utilize AWS resources to create a readily view the trees of archival files within the Illinois Data Bank. So this will make it easier for curators to review the files within the zip. And also it's easy for the user to learn what actually inside the zip files before they download in it. Next slide, please. So this slide is a screenshot of the archive file, and then the tree that the user can just click a button and then they can see what inside the zip files. Next slide, please. So in conclusions, in this paper, we describe our curation workflow, use our internal metrics to monitor the growth of the Illinois Data Bank, highlighted the improvements to our curation workflow, and describe the technical challenges and solutions that we use to help us to offer higher quality curation services. As we reflect on those examples, we know that any changes to the curation process, whether it's be the workflow adjustment or migration to cloud infrastructure require an adjustment in order for the system to function as intended and expected. So also internal metrics have been crucial in helping us prioritize development needs. So given their value so far, we expect that we will continue to add and standardize those metrics to help us monitor and access our curation services. With this, thank you so much for listening and happy to answer any question you have. Thank you.
Wow, that was excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And with FLAW's ending, we now have about 13 minutes for questions, answers, comments. Please feel free to use the Q&A or chat. I'm going to start by a question that was pre-submitted to give y'all time to type in your questions. So this person has a question for the hyperactive data curation authors. It seems like a lot of effort has gone into making the video data shared and open during the research process. I was wondering what plan is in place for the data upon completion of the study, and how and if the accessibility and shareability will be maintained in the long term.
That's a great question. So right now we're kind of, we're moving through stages in terms of what is being shared. So right now we're finally in the midst of actually collecting the data and curating them. But right now we do already have a repository where we're continually updating available protocol records and videos and things like that. We'll then move into kind of a place where we're only going to be sharing immediately amongst all of those who have been involved in collecting the data to give them time to publish on those data. And then everything will be fully open on Databrary. So anybody who is a Databrary authorized investigator will be able to access those data. We are hoping that we will have curated things well enough and marked sessions well enough that it will be usable. But we are thinking long-term about what are the kind of infrastructure plans we would need as part of Databrary. So Rick Gilmore, who's also on this call, and Karen Adolph, who's one of the co-authors or the co-directors of Databrary. So we're looking to kind of beef up the infrastructure of Databrary as well, and how to make the data searchable across other repositories or other ways of indexing it, because we know that we've kind of thought about how the people immediately in our field might want to be using these data or searching for them or finding pieces, but hoping to grow that, but also encouraging people to seek their own funding to annotate, build on annotations, build on indexing pieces of that. So we're treating this, the data set as a product that we would like people to continue to build off of, either supplementing it, building further annotations, doing machine learning, and contributing back to kind of a general infrastructure that we're hoping is kind of just a foundation for it.
That's great. Thanks so much. Rick, did you want to add anything as the co-director of Databrary? You of course don't have to, but.
No, I just want to say that play, Casey emphasized this. So play is somewhat unique as a research effort in the sense that the data itself, a well-curated data set, is the primary product. I mean, obviously there are scientific questions that all of the contributors who are collecting and coding the data will be making based upon those data. That's essentially one of the things we asked of all the members of the launch group, is to plan to write at least one paper on the basis of the data. So that makes it somewhat unique, but it is the data that themselves are one of the primary products. And again, putting it in a repository like Databrary, which of course, as many of you know, is at NYU on NYU infrastructure for the moment, is to make that available to the research community for an indefinite period.
Well, let's keep you two in the hot seat. I believe this question is for you. What tools did you use to create the protocols? Are the protocols reusable and shareable? Did the project adopt the credit author statement for recognition of all contributors of the project?
Yeah, so the protocol, how it's written up right now, everything is written in an R Markdown based website. We are actively trying to move things to a book down format, where we're trying to come up with ways where it's not just a website or something like that. So everything right now, there is GitHub repo that has all of our Markdown web pages. All of the videos that are demonstrating portions of the protocol are linked back to a Databricks repository, which is right now openly shared. And this is an incredibly detailed protocol where it's like literally every single, this is what the people that are actually collecting are using. There's nothing, like there's no secret hidden thing. So it's, yes, everything is completely reusable. Everything is shared out right now. And we are actively pursuing people that want to start replicating the protocol right now. We have not really looked into the credit system and author statements for everything. We're in the process of trying to figure out exactly how to do contributions for everything, because we have certain fields of experts, for instance, language experts who helped craft some of our measures of children's vocabulary, and how to kind of divide up all of those pieces. But that's a great suggestion, because we're in that crediting stage, and I think we need to move down that. Yes, and protocols.io is also what we're shopping around in those sort of options as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to give you two a second, and I'm going to turn it over. Hua and Seth, I'm going to include you in this question. Our data services are very thinly staffed, so we have to leverage liaisons to scale our data services. Which aspects or parts of the data curation and sharing workflows might realistically be done by librarians before escalating the service to a data librarian? Hua, why don't you start us off?
Micaela, quite call me first.
I can put Seth on the spot.
Well, to answer your question, so for us, we because like a lot of our subject specialists, they don't, current, like for the newer position, they may have data services as their job responsibility, but like for those positions has been established, they don't really have that as a requirement in their job descriptions. So we just try to be like collaborators as much as we can, and we respect their time as well, and we know they're busy. So like we normally would curate the whole data set. So like even though if it's not our knowledge, but we still look through on the data set before we send it to them, so then it will save them some time, and at least they will just like look over and confirm like what we think is exactly what's going on in the field. So we give them opportunity. So they feel free to like say no to us. Like it's happened. Again, it's not their responsibility, but like a lot of time when we send it out, we receive their reply, and like they just kind of like agree with us, and then that make us feel more comfortable when we send out an email suggestion to the depositor. Yeah, did I answer your question?
That's great. Seth, do you want to add anything?
The only thing, just to kind of repeat some of what Hua said, was that I would, we have to recognize that, the liaisons here will have their own expertise and their own constraints and, availability and their own work to do. But I think what I would want to add is, I think some of that expertise might be helpful for things like descriptive metadata on the project, keywords, better descriptions, abstracts, a lot of those kinds of things, subjects expertise is really helpful for. And that's a fair amount of work, like interacting with researchers to get that information, into the record is a lot of what we do as curators. So that's my only additional thought. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. And Julie just put a helpful link to a brand new JustLib article, Translating Liaison Librarians to the Scientific Community. I'm going to give everybody 1 more minute to get any questions in. I know it can take a second to type them, but I'll begin our wrap up by saying thank you all for being here today. And thank you especially to our speakers for your time and energy. And I want to +1 to Lena, I believe, in the chat about people with metadata backgrounds may be able to translate over well. I came from more of a metadata background, and that like used to like looking at really specific details can be really valuable in data curation.
Michaela,
Yes.
I think it's Francisco, is it? Yes, Francisco Juarez he didn't have a question, but maybe you could answer what he said about it's his first data soup. And
Well,
mailing list so he can join future sessions.
we love first time data supers. Regina, please correct me. I don't believe we have an externally facing data soup list.
No, I believe you've been doing it through the data curation, list.
That's what I thought. Apologies that you're seeing my entire screen. So if you go to the data curation network, I apologize, wrong button. Sorry, our website under news, I can put this link in the chat. If you scroll down on the right-hand column, there's a follow our progress. You receive new notifications of new blog posts. So you can see our most recent one was a data soup webinar. So anytime that we have one of these, we post it on our website. And if you are subscribed to this, you will get that notification. If you don't want to receive notification for every item, you can sign up for our newsletter, which we archive on our website. And you can subscribe here to receive that. That's only monthly, so you don't get too many of those. And I can drop these links in the chat. I'll stop sharing.
And I will stop recording.